RMS Republic. Nicknamed the Millionaire's ship, this luxurious ocean liner was a symbol of elegance and innovation when she was launched in 1903. But her story took a dramatic turn just 6 years later, when she sank in a collision. What makes the Republic truly unforgettable is not just her tragic end, but the groundbreaking rescue that followed. Using a revolutionary Marconi wireless telegraphy system, the ship issued one of the first ever CQD distress calls, leading to the saving of nearly 1,500 lives and changing maritime history forever. Hello everyone, it's Jamie from Old Shipping Lines. In today's video, we'll be covering the full story of the RMS Republic, from her construction to her tragic sinking. I hope you all enjoy. The vessel began her life as the SS Columbus, constructed by the renowned shipbuilders Harland and Wolff in Belfast, Ireland. She was built for the International Mercantile Marine's Dominion Line, a sister company to the White Star Line. Now, if we look at the specifications of the SS Columbus, her gross tonnage would be 15,400 gross registered tons with a length of 570 feet. She would have had a beam of 67.8 feet, and she would be steam powered with a top speed of 16 knots. The Columbus was launched on February 26, 1903, and completed her maiden voyage in October 1903, traveling from Liverpool to Boston. After completing 2 voyages with the Dominion Line, the Columbus, along with 3 other Dominion liners, the New England, Commonwealth, and Mayflower, was sold to the White Star Line to operate on their new Liverpool to Boston route. The Columbus was renamed Republic, becoming the second ship to bear this name under the White Star livery. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, she was nicknamed the Millionaire's ship. Now, you might be wondering why? Because she was known for catering to wealthy and elite passengers, particularly on transatlantic voyages between Europe and the United States. The ship, operated by the White Star Line, offered luxurious accommodations and amenities that attracted affluent travelers, including businessmen, socialites, and aristocrats. The 1909 White Star Line brochure proudly proclaimed her services from New York and Boston to the Mediterranean as the ideal entry into this vast treasure house of art. However, this treasure house turned into chaos on December 28, 1908, as the Republic lay docked in Genoa. 500 miles to the southeast, the city of Messina was in turmoil. A catastrophic earthquake had devastated the city, reducing it to ruins, killing 85,000 people, and triggering a mass migration of survivors. Some relocating to other parts of Italy, while others sought a more permanent future in the New World. The Republic departed Genoa as scheduled on Wednesday, December 30th, and left Naples on Saturday, January 2nd, carrying several earthquake survivors on board. The 5,118-ton Lloyd Italiano liner Florida was far more heavily booked, departing Naples for New York 8 days later with 824 steerage passengers, 14 cabin passengers, and a general cargo, primarily macaroni. Arriving in New York on January 14th, the Republic disembarked her passengers and cargo before being prepared for her next eastbound voyage. Bookings for the voyage had been moderately high, as many Americans sought to escape the winter chill. Captain William Inman Sealby oversaw the provisioning and stowage of cargo in preparation for the crossing. The cargo included 650 tons of supplies worth $61,000, 12,700 pounds for Rear Admiral Sperry's fleet, consisting of fresh and smoked meats, turkeys, potatoes, sugar, butter, and eggs. Also on board were the first relief supplies for Italy's earthquake victims, along with rumors of $250,000 in gold destined for the American fleet at Gibraltar. On January 22nd, relatives and spectators gathered to cheer as the Republic sounded her whistles, signaling her departure. The crowd scattered when, at the last moment, Mr. and Mrs. H.A. Hover from Spokane, Washington, raced down the pier in their car. Just in time, the Hovers managed to board before the gangways were hauled up, beginning their 100,000-mile round-the-world voyage. A few steerage passengers also arrived at the last moment. At 3 p.m., the final hawsers were cast off, and the Republic began easing into the North River. However, as she slowly backed out, she sideswiped the steamer Bermudian, causing several $100s worth of damage. After a brief delay, the voyage continued. Another latecomer, Italian Commissioner Dr. Pietro Giliberti, was ferried to the Republic on a tugboat. The ship sailed past the Statue of Liberty and soon past the Sandy Hook lightship, quickly increasing her speed to a steady 16 knots. As the Republic began her voyage, the Florida entered the final 36 hours of her westbound voyage. It had been an uneventful crossing, and the steerage passengers were already abuzz with excitement about their imminent arrival in the New World. By dinner time, as the Republic passed the eastern tip of Long Island, passengers began to notice a thin layer of vapor settling over the water. By 9 p.m., the mist had thickened significantly, though the ship's speed appeared largely unchanged. The Republic's whistle soon began sounding every 2 minutes as she made her way toward the Nantucket lightship, marking the western end of the transatlantic sea lanes. From there, she would turn southeast toward her first stop in the Azores. By 11 p.m., most passengers had retired to their cabins, while a few lingered in the smoking room, enjoying their final cigars of the evening. Some speculated that the ship's speed hadn't been reduced despite the dense fog, while others believed she was carefully navigating through it. As midnight marked the beginning of January 23rd, the Florida also encountered fog, first in fleeting wisps, then in dense banks until it settled in persistently. The ship's fog whistle began sounding at 90-second intervals, and her speed was reduced. Thus, 2 vessels carrying over 1,500 souls found themselves navigating a tense and perilous nautical version of Blind Man's Bluff. On both ships, captains and lookouts strained their senses to penetrate the thick murk, while passengers slept uneasily, often stirred by the mournful blasts of fog whistles. Approaching the Massachusetts coast, the Florida turned southwest in search of the Nantucket lightship. Without wireless communication or submarine signaling equipment, Captain Angelo Respini of the Florida relied on his doubled lookout for a visual sighting. However, the impenetrable fog thwarted their efforts, forcing Respini to resort to less precise methods to locate the lightship. He would say the following:
It is customary for inbound steamers from European ports approaching the coast, in thick weather, to hunt for the 30-fathom curve, which sweeps down 40 miles from Nantucket Island, and just outside of which is anchored the Nantucket South Shoal lightship. Vessels failing to pick up the lightship in the fog keep on sounding until they strike this 30-fathom curve. To the westward of the lightship there is a mud bottom, and this also gives a pretty definite position for vessels trying to get their bearings.
At this point, just 30 miles separated the eastbound and westbound traffic lanes. The Florida continued on her course, unaware that the Republic was sailing nearby. Perhaps with the sunrise only an hour away, the fog would lift and restore visibility. At approximately 5:42 a.m., both captains heard the sound of whistles through the dense fog. Aboard the Republic, Captain Sealby heard a blast off the port bow and immediately commanded full speed astern and hard to port. Moments later, bright lights emerged from the fog, both the port and starboard side lights of the Florida bearing down directly on the Republic's side. In a desperate effort to avert a collision, Sealby reversed course, ordering full speed ahead in hopes of outrunning the impending disaster. A whistle blast from the starboard side caught Ruspini's attention aboard the Italian ship, and he immediately responded with his own. Within moments, something like a mountain appeared directly in the path of the Florida, he recalled. As the Republic crossed from starboard to port, he ordered a starboard turn to maneuver the Florida behind it. However, there was not enough time to complete the turn. With a shuddering impact, the Florida's bow struck the Republic's port side just behind the funnel, creating a massive vertical tear from the promenade deck down to well below the waterline. A reporter on board the Republic described how many passengers were left with the impression that an explosion had occurred on board. The initial blast was followed by a deep, roaring sound, then a noise that resembled the tearing of tinder. Wireless operator John Robinson Binns, who had just finished a long day of transmitting messages, had turned in for the night. As the only operator on board, he fell asleep instantly. He would say the following:
"The shock of the impact shook me out of my bunk. A crunching, ripping noise followed as the Florida's bows crumpled up on our side. The panels and port side of our cabin fell in, one panel being smashed to splinters. My first impression was that we had run ashore, which was strengthened when I peered through the interstices of the wrecked woodwork of my cabin and saw a dark object outside, over which the sea was washing. This I took to be a rock, but later found it was boat number 15, which is always swung out from the ship. It had been torn from its davits."
Soon after the ship set sail, Mrs. Herbert L. Griggs swapped cabins with Mr. and Mrs. Michael J. Murphy from Grand Forks, North Dakota. She was awake when the crash happened. The lights went out, the ceiling collapsed, electric wires fell on me, and parts of the partition too, she recalled. I felt something holding me down, and it turned out to be a mattress from the next room. Mrs. Griggs was lucky. The bow of the Florida had crashed into staterooms 30, 32, and 34, seriously injuring Mrs. Murphy and breaking her thigh. Had the cabin change not occurred, Mrs. Griggs would have been in the destroyed cabin 30. Remarkably, Mr. Murphy only suffered minor cuts and bruises. In cabin 34, Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Lynch were enjoying their journey. Prominent Boston philanthropists, they were heading to Italy to aid in post-earthquake relief efforts. After weighing the choice between Cunard and Hamburg, America, they decided on the Republic following a friend's recommendation. The collision, however, tragically crushed Mrs. Lynch, while her husband suffered multiple fractures to his right leg, severe internal injuries, contusions, and shock. In the nearby cabin, 32, Mr. W.J. Mooney of Langdon, North Dakota, was killed instantly. His wife, positioned on the opposite side of the room, miraculously survived. The collapsed woodwork from the stateroom created an arch above her. Rev. John W. Norris, a New Jersey clergyman, was thrown from his bunk by the impact. He says the following:
I had on only my pajamas when I reached the deck. Soon a steward came up and said that several passengers had been apparently badly injured in their staterooms. I started to go to the staterooms when the lights went out. I had to feel my way and fight against the stream of passengers in the corridor. When I got near the point of impact, I could hear the water rushing in. I reached Mrs. Lynch before she died and ministered to her. She seemed to be conscious. In getting to the adjoining stateroom, I had to swing myself across a chasm made in the side of the vessel. The cold water caught me and nearly carried me away, but I was just able to swing myself into what had been Mr. Mooney's stateroom. I pried out a bunk which had been crushed against the wall. There, I found Mr. Mooney in a frightful condition, almost dead. Both he and Mrs. Lynch were dead before I left them. When I had completed my religious errand, it was too late to reach my own stateroom for clothing.
As Republic's passengers and crew struggled to make sense of sudden chaos, the disaster's other participant, Florida, disappeared into the fog. On board her, too, there was confusion and panic. Philomena Kyliafern, a cabin passenger, had been unable to sleep and was on deck at the moment of collision.
I walked forward and was peering into the darkness ahead when the hull of the approaching vessel came into view almost ahead of us. There was more and hurried whistling, and then the bow of the Florida went crunching into the side of the Republic. Through the Florida, and I gripped hold of the rail. It seemed to me that there were two distinct blows struck. The bow of our steamer seemed to rebound a bit from the Republic, and then the two vessels came together again.
For Florida's steerage, many survivors of Messina's earthquake, the jolt awakened very fresh memories of disaster. Another cabin passenger, Dominic Roberto, saw their fear. He would say the following:
Already the steerage passengers awakened from sleep were swarming in terror to the deck. Looking down from the deck, we could see them by the light of the ship's lamps running about, some crying while others huddled under the side of the deck house. Others were praying. All was excitement when the ship's officers went about among the half-crazed praying crowd and assured them that there was no danger. Some were soon quieted, but others had to be almost driven below before they would cease their wails. In the end, a measure of quiet was restored. It was a wildly exciting time, and among us all there was a great feeling of unrest and anxiety until we were told that the Florida had not been hit in a vital spot and that she would keep afloat. This anxiety was intensified when we saw the crew spring to the boats and get them ready to be dropped into the water.
For around 30 feet, the bow of Florida was crushed. 3 crew members, who had been asleep in their quarters, were killed instantly, including 14-year-old seaman Salvatore D'Amico. He had joined the Florida in an effort to escape the painful memories of losing his family and home in the earthquake. With the first 2 compartments flooded, the ship noticeably settled by the bow, but she didn't seem to be in immediate danger. Meanwhile, Captain Sealby on the Republic was receiving damage reports. The promenade deck railing is bent and broken. Lifeboat 15 has been torn off. At least 2 passengers are dead in their cabins, and there are injuries everywhere. Most concerning of all, water is flooding into the engine and boiler rooms at a rate that the pumps can't keep up with. In just 5 minutes, the water short-circuited the dynamos, plunging the ship into total darkness. The Black Gang struggled in waist-high water, Trying to keep the boiler fires going, 4th Engineer J.G. Legg bravely adjusted the injector valves, reducing boiler pressure and preventing an explosion. The watertight doors had been sealed just before the collision, but would the bulkheads withstand the massive influx of water? The passenger alleyways were crowded with anxious passengers, relying on matches, a few flashlights, candles, and lanterns lit by stewards to navigate their way to the upper decks. They paused at the base of the grand staircase to collect life belts. Amid the noise of worried conversations and the crew's shouts while launching lifeboats, the sounds of water flooding the hull couldn't be ignored. Several of Republic's steerage passengers rushed toward the lifeboats, eager to board, until an officer with a revolver ordered them to step back. Elsewhere, petty officers moved through the crowd, reassuring nervous passengers in their pajamas and nightgowns, restoring some sense of order. The crew's swift presence at emergency posts helped calm the passengers. 2 distress rockets fired from the bridge called for a nearby ship to come to Republic's aid. Meanwhile, wireless operator Binns had discovered that while 3 walls of his wireless cabin had collapsed, his Marconi transmitter was still operational, albeit powerless. Determined to report to the captain, he tried to make his way to the bridge, but was stopped by the wreckage scattered across the deck. Returning to the wireless cabin, he searched for emergency storage batteries. His success was crucial, as 2,000 lives were at stake. After diving into a flooded adjacent compartment, he found and connected the batteries. Within half an hour, he transmitted a preliminary message to the Siasconset, Massachusetts, Marconi Station. The Republic. "We are shipwrecked. Stand by for Captain's message." The reply came back cheerfully. "All right, old man, where are you?" Soon after, a messenger arrived to escort Binns to the bridge for further instructions. On the way, they passed stewards handing out coffee to passengers. With Sealby's authorization, the message struggled to broadcast on battery power. Republic's set now had a range of only 50 miles, but it was relayed by Siasconset's more powerful station. Republic, rammed by unknown steamship, 26 miles southwest of Nantucket Lightship, in urgent need of immediate assistance, but no danger to life. Sealby. With the ship visibly sinking by the stern and no hope of halting the flooding, Sealby faced the harsh reality of evacuation. There weren't enough lifeboats for everyone on board, and the nearest land was 80 miles away. Fortunately, the source of the damage became the source of their salvation, as Florida appeared in response to Republic's repeated whistle blasts. Officers arranged via megaphone for the transfer of passengers and crew to the less damaged Italian ship. Around 7 a.m., Sealby addressed the passengers on deck from the bridge.
"Passengers of the Republic, I want to advise you that the steamer has been injured in collision. We are in no immediate danger, but I want to ask you to stand by me and act with coolness and judgment. There is, I repeat, no immediate danger, but to be on the safe side, it is necessary for you to be transferred to the Florida as soon as possible. It will take some time, and I expect that you will be cool and not excited. Take your time getting into the lifeboats. Remember, the women and children go first and the first cabin next, and then the others. The crew will be the last to leave this vessel."
As the crew prepared the lifeboats for lowering, Republic's passengers waited calmly. One passenger sat on the deck playing solitaire, another was fixing her hair, and others sat on their lifebelts. Several attempted to bribe the stewards to go below for additional clothing or luggage, while other stewards offered their services. Meanwhile, Binns limited his transmissions to conserve battery power. In the dark, he accidentally broke his sending key and had to hold the pieces together with one hand while transmitting with the other. He heard Siasconset rebroadcast the distress message, followed by welcome promises of help from several ships, including La Lorraine, Phoenicia, Lucania, New York, and White Star's own Baltic. One by one, passengers wearing bulky lifebelts made their way down the pilot and accommodation ladders to the lifeboats, each boat taking about 20 passengers aboard. Florida's boats assisted in the evacuation. As they did so, the passengers had their first clear view of Republic's damage. Crew members quickly rigged a tarpaulin over the gash to slow the flooding and prolong the ship's life. Lowering the injured passengers and crew proved challenging, but within 2 hours all passengers had been safely evacuated, following a careful order based on gender, age, and class. The crew then began their own departure. Sealby, along with 45 crew members, including Jack Binns, remained on board, awaiting rescue ships, particularly the Baltic. There remained a chance that Republic could be towed into shallow water and beached. The bodies of Mr. Mooney and Mrs. Lynch, placed in coffins, remained behind on the promenade deck. Those transferred to the Florida found conditions less than ideal. As one passenger wrote,
"They covered every deck of the smaller steamship so thickly that there was no room to move about. Here, the passengers huddled together for 15 hours, suffering from cold, hunger, and thirst. The Florida's officers did the best they could to give assistance, but they were carrying a large list of immigrants, and as the vessel was in the condition you might expect from that fact, they could do but little for the comfort of the Republic's passengers."
The food was sparse, accompanied by red and white wine, while the mournful sound of Florida's fog whistle lingered in the background. An attempt to provide rescued passengers with clothing failed, as Florida's own passengers had so little to spare. Meanwhile, the Baltic had been near Montauk Point, Long Island, about 64 miles away, when wireless operator Henry J. Tattersall and assistant G.W. Balfour received word of Republic's peril from Siasconset at 6 a.m. Republic, wrecked and needs assistance. Position, latitude 40.17 north, longitude 70 west. They immediately informed Captain Joseph B. Ranson, who turned the ship toward Republic's location. Siasconset kept both Binns and Captain Sealby updated on the situation. By this time, Republic's wireless operator was enduring extreme discomfort from the cold and damp, which seeped through the gaps in the collapsed, unheated wireless cabin. There was no time to leave for a moment to warm up, as a critical message could be missed. His clothes, still wet from searching for batteries underwater, clung to him, and he grew increasingly numb and stiff. Around 2 p.m., his considerate steward, Douglas, brought him food and coffee. Eventually, Binns realized that he needed to move to avoid freezing and decided to personally deliver messages to the bridge. He would say the following:
The first time I went to the bridge, I was so chilled I was shaking from head to foot. My teeth rattled and I was scarcely able to talk. Captain Sealby said, "Don't be afraid, Mr. Binns. We will see that you get off all right." I smiled and told him it was the cold and not fear that made me shake and prevented me from talking audibly.
With blankets provided by the loyal Douglas, Binns pressed on. Fog persisted throughout the day. As the light began to fade in the late January afternoon, it became clear that Baltic was struggling to locate Republic in the thick fog. Republic's hours were dwindling, and the already heavily burdened Florida had developed a list and lacked wireless communication should she need further assistance. Florida couldn't move, as any forward motion might cause the bulkhead holding back the sea to give way. Captain Ranson of the Baltic estimated that they had covered 200 miles zigzagging through the area. But where was Republic? Binns added another clue. Have picked up Nantucket submarine bell, north-northeast. Soundings 35 fathoms. Ronson reversed course whenever he lost the signal from the submarine bell or when the soundings exceeded 35 fathoms. Since Baltic could now hear directly from Republic, Binns believed the ship was nearby. Agonizing minutes passed. The most anxious hour was at about 6 o'clock in the evening, when Captain Sealby heard, only faintly, the explosion of a bomb in the far distance.
He at once communicated with me, and I learned that the Baltic had been exploding bombs to apprise us of her whereabouts. We too had been exploding bombs, but exhausted our supply, and from now on had nothing but our almost exhausted and fast weakening wireless apparatus to which we could pin our hopes of rescue. The Baltic then informed me that she had but a solitary bomb left, and arranged with us that this would be exploded at a certain moment.
On Republic's bridge, Sealby instructed his skeleton crew to form a circle, facing outward, each man straining to listen. At the designated time, Baltic's crew detonated the final explosive. 5 seconds passed. Then Binns reported that he thought he heard a faint sound. The third officer next to him agreed, believing he heard it too. A bearing was quickly taken, and Binns rushed back to the wireless cabin to send the information to Baltic.
A little later, we heard the Baltic's foghorn blowing faintly, and this increased in volume as she lessened the distance between us. Occasionally we fired rockets, but they could not be seen through the fog, although a little later the Baltic's siren was heard so plainly that we knew the ship was close by. Sealby issued orders that the Baltic be told to proceed as carefully as possible, as she was now too close on our port side to be safe. I had just communicated this message when I heard a cheer, and I at once realized that these sounds of rejoicing could not come from our men, as only Captain Sealby, the officers, myself, and the crew were aboard our ship, and they were all busily engaged in standing by the boats. Looking aft through my splintered cabin, I made out the Baltic quite near to the stern of our ship. She was a blaze of light, and as I sat there in my little cabin, the thought occurred to me that the most beautiful sight in the world is a ship at sea, especially when that ship is needed to supply a link between life and death.
Sealby now instructed Binns to send a final message. Come to our leeward and take up our boats. Have Lorraine and Lucania convoy the Florida. Wireless now closed. The exhausted operator then joined the officers and crew in the lifeboats. At last, the fog began to lift and rescue ships were sighted. Among them was the Standard Oil whaleback steamer, City of Everett. Captain Thomas Fenlon said,
About 3 p.m., we sighted the Republic on our port bow close aboard. Headway was taken off the speed. We drifted very slowly close by the Republic and offered to assist him. We offered to tow him to shoal water. Captain Sealby, said he was in communication with his New York office and that they were sending Merritt and Chapman's wrecking fleet to assist him to make port. We then went to the SS Florida and offered her captain our assistance. He said he was waiting for the Baltic to arrive near him to take off passengers of the Republic. At about 5 p.m., we were alongside the Florida, close enough to see the condition of the hull. The only thing keeping her afloat was the tightness of the number 1 bulkhead. The sea was so smooth that the lifeboats were laying very comfortably alongside the Florida, with no danger of damage whatsoever. At 6 p.m., we launched our number 1 lifeboat and crew in charge of the first officer, and instructed him to make it clear to both captains that our ship was entirely equipped for very wrecking and towing. Our offer to tow, made the second time, was again refused. All my offers of assistance having been refused, I decided to leave the scene of the collision and continue my voyage. In my own mind, I feel assured that had the master of the Republic engaged the city of Everett on arrival at the scene of the collision at 3 p.m., January 23, 1909, we would have had the Republic anchored in Martha's Vineyard by noon, January 24th. Of course, this is one man's opinion.
Sealby knew that the revenue cutters, Gresham and Seneca, both equipped with towing gear, were on their way. Perhaps he was also considering the potential salvage reward the city of Everett might earn. Upon her arrival at 7:30 p.m., after more than 12 hours of searching and a half day of fear among those aboard Florida, Baltic passed by Florida and went straight to Republic. Passengers, confused and anxious, demanded to know why they hadn't been taken off. One unverified rumor spread that the $250,000 in gold allegedly on board was being removed. By 11:30 p.m., Baltic had completed operations alongside Republic. On the bridge of the Baltic, Sealby and Ranson held a conference and confirmed plans for transferring everyone aboard Florida to Baltic, along with hopes for Republic's salvage. Under the intense glare of Baltic's searchlights, the second evacuation began shortly before midnight. Lifeboats from Republic, Florida, and Baltic began ferrying the 1,650 passengers and crew to safety on Baltic. As before, evacuation followed the order of gender and class, but this time first-class men. Steerage women and children were evacuated first, followed by first-class men. One American first-class passenger demanded, "Will somebody tell me why saloon passengers should be given preference over steerage in a case like this?" The Republic officer stationed at the top of the accommodation ladder merely glared in response. The transfers were made more difficult by heavy seas and rain. Passengers had to climb a narrow ladder, and 2 women lost their grip, plunging into the sea. They were quickly rescued by nearby lifeboats. The injured, lying on stretchers, were hauled up by ropes, and they were the last to be brought aboard the Baltic. Eugene Lynch, severely injured, remained aboard Florida. The entire transfer process took an exhausting 7 hours. By 10 a.m., Sealby and a skeleton crew returned to await the promised tow. Remarkably, Binns managed to reactivate the wireless, and Captain Sealby was kept informed of the tugboat's slow progress toward his position. Binns said,
By this time, the Phoenicia had arrived and had been standing by. Then the Florida came alongside the Republic, remaining there as a safeguard for those of us left on our ship, and the Baltic took up her journey to New York with her tremendous burden of human freight. As she steamed by our stern, every living soul aboard the Baltic gave us a hearty cheer.
The Florida, too, made her way toward New York under her own power, escorted closely. Captain Ranson of the Baltic promptly sent a wireless message to White Star's New York offices, reporting the success of the operation. Meanwhile, the Republic drifted aimlessly in the mist, powerless and vulnerable. Binns occupied himself by repairing the shattered wireless cabin, using blankets to block the cold. A volunteer cook prepared lunch for the crew, lifting their spirits. Despite Republic's significant port list and heavy stern sag, she appeared to be settling very slowly. At last, the revenue cutter Gresham arrived. After a conference via megaphone, Gresham attached 2 steel lines and a hawser to Republic's bow, while Furnesia, acting as a rudder, secured hawsers aft. An axe was placed near Gresham's lines, and if an immediate separation became necessary, Sealby would signal with a blue Coaston light. The goal was clear: beach the Republic. Sea conditions, the hawser's breaking strength, and Republic's weakened state all dictated a slow and careful progression. At a pace of 1 or perhaps 2 knots, the trio moved forward. By 4 p.m., Republic had taken on so much water that Sealby ordered the crew to board the lifeboats and transfer to the Gresham. After nearly 36 hours at his quay, with only a few hours of rest aboard the Baltic, Binns abandoned his cabin for the final time. Despite his crew's pleas, Sealby refused to leave his ship, instead requesting 1 volunteer to stay with him. Second Officer Richard J. Williams, the senior unmarried man, was chosen for the solitary vigil. Around 5 p.m., the cutter Seneca arrived, having come from the Virginia coast to assist. By 8 p.m., the ships had covered 6 miles toward the shore, but the half-submerged 15,000-ton liner was becoming increasingly difficult to control. The cutters and other ships standing by kept Republic illuminated with their searchlights. By 8:30 p.m., Republic's taffrail was submerged, and it was clear that her final moments had arrived. On the bridge, Sealby and Williams both understood it. Said the captain,
"We could tell it was coming. Suddenly, we heard a rumbling and then a cracking sound aft, and the stern of the Republic began to go down rapidly. I turned to Williams and said, 'Well, old man, what do you think about it?' 'I have an idea it won't be a long race now,' Williams answered, 'and when you are ready, I am.' 'Burn the blue lights,' I said, and then, as a signal to the Gresham that it was time to cut the hawsers that bound her to the Republic, I fired 5 shots into the air from my revolver. That was the beginning of the last few minutes of the Republic. 'Take to the fore-rigging, get as high as possible,' I shouted to Williams. From the bridge deck to the saloon deck, both of us carrying blue lights, Williams and I ran. When we got to the saloon deck, the water was already coming over that deck aft, and we could see the stern sinking rapidly, the incline of the deck, as we ran forward, becoming so steep that we began to slip with every step. About that time, I saw Williams, for the last time, on the Republic. He was hanging on to the port rail, and dim as was the light, I saw he was as game as ever. I took to the fore-rigging and climbed up about 100 feet. In my pocket was a blue light, and I took it out, but it would not go off. There was still 1 more shell in my pistol, however, and I fired that. Down, down, down went the Republic, and soon she was entirely submerged, and a moment later I was in the water. I wore my greatcoat, and the air getting under that made it support me, while the binoculars, the revolver, and the cartridges in my pockets acted as a sort of ballast. The water around me by this time was seething and roaring due to the suction caused by Republic as she sank, and several times I was carried down, only to be churned back to the surface.
The mighty Republic sank stern first into 30 fathoms of water. After a prolonged wait in the icy waters, Williams and Sealby were rescued by a lifeboat from the Gresham. In the aftermath, Sealby received widespread acclaim for his steadfast commitment to his ship. and his exemplary leadership during the crisis. Upon arriving in New York aboard Florida, he was hailed as a hero. The other injured passengers gradually made full recoveries. White Star quickly took legal action against the Florida, seeking damages for the loss of its ship, her cargo, the lives of 3 passengers, and all passengers' belongings. Under American law, the maximum they could recover was Florida's value, her freight earnings, and the fares from passengers. Combined, these amounted to less than 10% of the $2 million they had sought. Florida was repaired and sold to another Italian company in 1911, 6 weeks before the 8th anniversary of her collision with the Republic. She collided with the Italian auxiliary cruiser Caprera and sank. Republic's name disappeared from public memory until 1987, when an American salvage expedition attempted, unsuccessfully, to find the gold that was rumored to have been on board. However, numerous artifacts were recovered and eventually displayed in a Massachusetts museum. Wireless communication was hailed as a revolutionary advancement and a vital necessity aboard ships. The British Board of Trade's lifeboat regulations, last updated in 1894, remained unchanged as the extraordinary rescue, made possible by wireless technology, clearly demonstrated that the need for additional equipment was no longer essential. Safety had been ensured through invisible waves, eliminating the requirement for more conventional safety provisions. Jack Binns became a national hero, celebrated by the press and the public for his crucial role in one of history's most remarkable maritime rescues. Overwhelmed by attention from publicity seekers, single women, and job offers from all corners, including a vaudeville house, he eventually returned home to his girlfriend, receiving a tumultuous welcome. The Marconi company later honored him with a watch and a testimonial for his courage in performing his duty. Even before the excitement surrounding his heroism had fully died down, Jack Binns signed on to another ship, one of the world's largest liners, the Adriatic. He served aboard her for 2 years under the command of Captain Edward John Smith. In 1911, he joined Smith again on the Olympic. That same year, Binns was present for the launch of yet another White Star giant, the Titanic. However, by 1912, Binns chose to leave Marconi's employ and accepted a position with the New York American. Eager to begin his new career, he immediately set sail on the Minnewaska, unable to wait for Titanic's maiden voyage under Captain Smith's command. He began his work at the American within hours of Titanic's tragic disaster.
And that marks the end of a video, my friends. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now, if you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing to the channel, as that would help out the channel a lot. Now, if you have any thoughts, comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, as I absolutely love reading your comments. And please let me know in the comment section down below as well what ships you would like me to cover in the future. Now be as well sure to check out our social media pages. We are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and we also recently have a website, oldshippinglines.com, where we have articles of the ships we cover and we have book reviews as well. I think you will enjoy the website very much. Now, with that out of the way, guys, I wish you all a good night or day, wherever you are. Stay safe, stay happy, and we will see each other on the next video. Goodbye, my friends.